Will Jones is an urban planner, technologist, and designer working at the intersection of community data, climate resilience, and digital infrastructure. He is also the co-founder of Grounded, a New York City-based urban practice working at the intersection of planning, data, and design. Grounded supports teams in public, nonprofit, and private sector by bringing a community-centered lens to data analytics, urban and graphic design, inclusive economic development, and strategic planning. Will presented The Cloud is a Place in Brooklyn, a speculative design workshop where he asked guests, what if our data infrastructure lived in the neighborhood parks, schools, or community gardens? What if a data center didn't just store files but also used this excess heat to warm a public pool in the winter? What if data infrastructure was owned by communities and served community needs? Check out Grounded's work, links are in the description box below.
Hey folks, my name is Will Jones. Our demonstration is an activity focused on speculative visioning. We really want to encourage folks to think about what a speculative vision for New York City data centers could look like. Particularly, what would it look like in your community? Who would it benefit? Who would run it? And how could it operate? So without that, I'm happy to jump into it. So just a little recap, I'm Will Jones. I'm a co-founder of Grounded. Grounded is a transdisciplinary urban planning practice. We really operate at the intersection of urban design, urban planning, data, and data analytics. One of my co-facilitators, who's not here at the moment, Rajesh, is a project manager at 3x3, which is a really great urban planning practice as well. We begin sort of our presentation by covering what projected data center growth looks like. You can see at the low end the projected electricity consumption of data centers, even as they continue to grow. It's projected to be at 4.6%, and that's at the lowest end, meaning if our smallest projections come true, it would still have a 4.6 additional draw. Versus on the higher end of things, think of the hyperscaler data centers, the large ones. If those are the dominant force and those projections continue to come true, we'll be drawing electricity at a rate of 9.1 additional percent. So, as you can see historically, data centers have had a pretty gradual and scaled sort of demand, but really since the commercialization of AI, it's exponentially increased, and at its lowest possible potential, it is still more than double the consumption of prior years. So we want to foreground by sharing a little bit of what traditional data centers look like, because they vary in size and scope and scale and performance. So just to cover it quickly, there's hyperscale. This one pictured here is an Amazon AWS data center. It is 1,200 acres located in Arizona. What you see pictured here are actually 7 different data centers combined onto one campus. And so you can imagine the scale of draw, both from the power grid, but also water, and how that's impacting an otherwise local rural community. There's also enterprise ones, and don't let the public art fool you. Public art does not in any way mitigate the real environmental justice concerns that these larger facilities bring. Enterprise facilities are a little bit smaller than the hyperscale, but are nevertheless large, comparable to a city block in New York City. There's co-location sites. The one pictured here is in Secaucus, New York. And you can think of it as a WeWork for data centers, where a number of private companies lease space within a server, a co-located site, and they can scale up or scale down how much compute they need. And finally, there's edge computing, which is a smaller, more modular version located near and closer to the communities that they are serving. And while those are traditional models, ones that sort of thrive off of traditional capitalist models, ones that are used by your typical hegemonic powers like Google and OpenAI and Anthropic, we, however, really want to encourage folks to think and use their imaginations to consider what other possibilities look like, what a data center that serves more than just capitalist needs could be. So here we have pictured one such counter-hegemonic example, which is Solar Server by Kara Stone. As you can see, underneath the table is a set of servers that are plugged into a solar panel. And it's one sort of hyper-local model of a hyper-local data center that is efficiently charged and powered by renewable resources. Another such example is the Low Tech Magazine. Now, the Low Tech Magazine is a website that runs exclusively on solar-powered energy. It goes offline from time to time according to its sort of power needs, but it's dedicated to sharing out information about solar and other low-tech alternatives. And because of that, they've intentionally designed the website, which kind of looks like an old school MySpace page, but done so in a way that preserves energy and draw and demonstrates that we don't need all of the floss and gloss that we've become accustomed to in order to run an efficient and eco-friendly website. Finally, and this is one of my favorite examples, it emerges from New Zealand and the TKR Charitable Trust. They've worked with 3 Maori communities to establish a community cultural archive. And this archive contains everything from oral histories to photos and documentation of local artifacts, but it really is a method of working with local communities to preserve their own cultural identities, and through setting up an ownership of the physical infrastructure as well as the digital infrastructure, these communities own and control not only who has access, but who can edit and update and download information. And so it becomes a trusted community shared resource that is entirely stewarded by this community instead of being shared or disaggregated across third-party tools like Google Drive or AWS Web Services, which don't have the same principles or value community-owned infrastructure or data in the same ways. So we've got some information that sort of highlight, and what I skipped over is just, there are other counter hegemonic examples. There are manifestos that have been created which really set up principles and visions for how these sort of systems can be created, and how they can be created in ways that value more than just capital and capital extraction at any cost. And just briefly want to go over sort of the physical footprint of data centers before we start to think about some of our own alternatives. You know, as we know and have covered a little bit, data centers already account for 1 to 2% of global electricity use. Now, as we saw from the chart earlier, that sort of really escalated in 2020 with commercialized AI, but is only increasing. And so over the last 4 years, we've increased to around 2% global draw. They are situated in lands where vulnerable communities already exist and are already struggling with local environmental justice issues, and they serve as a mechanism to compound those issues. And they show up in these communities intentionally because many of these communities lack the democratic infrastructure necessary to properly push back against some of the extractive practices that they have. Some of those practices include drawing upon both energy and water consumption from local towns without properly paying into or building out that infrastructure, while also simultaneously using public subsidies for that extraction from both local governments as well as from federal governments. But there's also extraction and exploitation and domination when it comes down to power and participation. From a local power perspective, community agreements between developers may appear good on paper, but often lack the long-term assurances necessary to ensure that benefit continues to be driven. From a local and economic power standpoint, there have been many studies, including ones from Georgia, which calculate that actually the claims of economic development spurred, particularly workforce development spurred by data centers, are often exaggerated. Many of that work that emerges is construction work, which is short-term but not long-term for the duration that these data centers exist. And the staffing needs, data centers are actually quite lean and efficient. They don't need a lot of staff. And the staff that they do require are highly specialized and often do not match the skills of the local communities that the data centers are being built within. And again, from a democratic participation, these are happening through deals in ways that communities are not present and their needs are not being adequately represented. So one way of thinking about this is through a Black feminist framework. And we've selected one from Patricia Hill Collins, who's a Brandeis alum. Shout out to Brandeis University, my alma mater. But it looks at 4 different sort of mechanisms through which domination occurs. And this can be applied at both a social level, a market level, a political level, those being structural, hegemonic, disciplinary, and interpersonal. And we can already imagine how these are occurring. From a structural perspective, again, I'm an urban planner and grounded in urban planning practice. So we think about how zoning enables the placement and scale of data centers that we are seeing as they emerge right next to these local rural communities. From a hegemonic perspective, these data centers, it'd be one thing if they were processing local transit data or air quality data or other environmental justice type of data from a public perspective, but they're not. These are owned by AWS and Google and OpenAI, and they are processing data that enables their bottom lines and more pervasive extraction via capitalism. From a disciplinary perspective, we can see the ways that these companies are deputizing law enforcement in order to crack down upon protesters or those who would otherwise push back against the placement of these data centers within their communities. And it's deeply interpersonal. It's people's water, their drinking water, their bathing water, their cooking water. It's their utilities bills, which as a New Yorker, I'm feeling myself, and I can only imagine what it might be like if whole data centers emerged next to my home, if they raised the property of my taxes without actually contributing to any of the utilities or benefits that I receive. And so with that, we also want to highlight Ruha Benjamin, Professor and Dr. Ruha Benjamin of Princeton University, who's created an imagination manifesto, which really encourages people to use their imagination to think about alternatives to the harms that we've mentioned throughout this presentation. So for the last bit, thank you for sticking with me this long. We'd love to transition to just highlighting some of the work that contributors and participants of the workshop did. So we had a pop-up activity which asked folks across a number of different domains, if a data center came to your block in New York City, what would it look like, who would control it, and how would it function? And so we've got a number of different participants who wrote down their concerns or their ideas on how it might function, how it might benefit their community. Some even put rules around the need to employ local community members. Some put rules that it should be community owned. Others came up with ideas of a local community data center in Long Island City that could host community recipes. And some thought about how it might be powered. One user thought about how treated wastewater that otherwise might be reintroduced into existing water streams could be used as a coolant for some of these data centers. I think the biggest thing I want folks to take away is that what we've been told about AI, from how inevitable it will be, to all of the promises about what it could do for us, is not a given. I won't say it's a lie, but I think that it takes real imagination to think about how these tools, from AI tools themselves to the structures and infrastructure that enables them, such as data centers, can be beneficial. And I think by some of the examples that we showed, by some of the contributions of our participants, there's a lot more creative thinking that can be done as we think about how to go from thinking about AI and data centers as commodities to things that can be and provide public benefit.
What's one way our viewers can support your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Look us up online. You can find us at www.grounded.xyz. I'll spell it. That's ground3d.xyz. You can also look us up on LinkedIn. Again, we're Grounded. Grounded is spelled with a 3 instead of an E at the end. But yeah, look us up on LinkedIn. My name is Will Jones. So happy to connect, and please shoot me a message. You can also email us at info@ground3d.xyz or info@grounded.xyz.